I speak tomorrow to the Wisconsin Hospital Association. Right? I'm taking the last flight to Chicago tonight, and I got to drive to Lake Geneva.
You all plugged in?
No.
Oops.
I got to talk to you also about what classes you're auditing.
Well, you've got more interesting ones than I do.
Are you auditing any here? Are you auditing any here at the
No.
Kennedy?
I've made a conscious decision not to do that.
Are you still in Porter? And
No, I'm not Porter. I'm not in Porter, but I'm still in Frieden. I walked out today.
How's world economy? I
They did.
have a conflict, but I feel like it might be worth
Your
it.
terms as governor were 4 years each, so I think 3 terms. I mean, it's not
We
one
should
or
get
2
together.
terms.
Yeah, that would be great. Oh, yeah.
Hello, everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, call me. Yeah, I'm here.
Heather.
That guy.
Good evening, everybody. And on behalf of the Student Advisory Committee, I'd like to welcome you to the Institute of Politics. The IOP, as some of you know, was founded as a living memorial to the late President John F. Kennedy. Our mission is to encourage students to pursue careers in politics and public life. And the Fellows Program and the 6 fellows that we have here this semester are a living embodiment of that mission. I'd like to encourage all undergraduates to get involved in the Fellows Program by joining the Student Fellows Committee. And I'd like to encourage everybody to get to know the fellows as well as they can, to attend the study groups they're going to be running, and to just stop by their offices on the first floor of the IOP here just to chat and say hi. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Phil Sharp. Phil was a 10-term congressman from the state of Indiana and is now the director of the Institute of Politics. Phil.
Thank you very much, Bill. Bill Abley is the chairman of our Fellows Committee, and he and other students actually participate in the selection process of the folks that you see before you. Indeed, our students participate in most of the decisions on programming and organization as a part of our effort to provide opportunities for people to hone their skills in leadership at the Institute of Politics. But this particular part of our program is a long-standing part of the Institute of Politics. It's an effort to bring in people who have had real-world experience and have them, through their study groups, focus attention on an issue or a part of the process in our society today. But more importantly, in addition, is to provide opportunities for students and people in the Harvard community to deal with them on a one-to-one basis as individuals. So I always urge, as Bill just did, for you to catch them on the street, catch them in the hallway, pursue them in their offices, bug them, and try to milk them for their experience and their learning, and maybe you can teach them a few things in the process as well. But let me quickly introduce, and each of them are going to take 5 to 7 minutes to tell a little bit about themselves or their views on politics or about their study group. We're very pleased to have this group with us for this semester. They are resident fellows. And first is a former governor of the state of Colorado, a 3-term governor. That means 12 years he served in the governorship of Colorado, known for his willingness to take on the conventional wisdom and to push his constituents and indeed the country to consider issues that were not easily popular or ones that people necessarily wanted to have to confront. He later, as you know, I'm sure, in this last presidential election, he sought to have a major impact on the presidential election, and he campaigned for the leadership of the Reform Party as a part of the independent movement in this country. He is also currently director of the Center for Public Policy and Contemporary Issues at the University of Denver. Governor Lamb.
Thank you. President Jacques Chirac of France, when he wasn't actually running, but in this last campaign when he was defending his party, said something that just haunts me. He says, politics is not the art of the possible. He says, politics is making possible what is necessary. Boy, does that speak to me. It is my thesis that we can't get there from here, that my generation has not left a sustainable society to your generation, that there needs to be some new operating paradigms in American politics. When I got out of college in 1957, the average American woman had 3.6 children. Well, that was the demography of that time. You could support some of the social programs we have right now. But I'm afraid we can no longer. You're sitting, in my opinion, at the end of a chain letter. And so Social Security, Medicare, health care, we need some really new creative thinking to try to find out, what do we do with these programs? How do you run a society of 50 Floridas? The average age in America when I got out of college was 23. It's now 34. It'll soon be 38. I mean, this is just phenomenal. And it makes demographically obsolete so many of the most popular programs. And so all of a sudden, all these things that we got ourselves in this political catch-22 where the best politics makes the worst public policy. You can't do politically what you need to do economically to leave a sustainable society to your generation. So I'm intrigued by this. How do we organize the new political paradigms for the future? And that's what I will be running my study group on, and it's sort of my consuming passion these days. Bill?
Thank you very much. Governor Lamb will have to leave us in a few minutes to catch a plane, but he will certainly be around for you to corner him and talk with him over the days and weeks ahead. Very pleased now to introduce William Boosenberg, who is on my right here. It's two down. Bill Boosenberg has been Vice President for News and Information of National Public Radio. He was with NPR for nearly 18 years. He was responsible for the institution of such programs that you're familiar with, of Talk of the Nation and Weekly Edition. He has had a long and distinguished career in journalism and the building of a news organization to try to cover American politics and other societal questions. And he began his public life as a member of the U.S. Peace Corps.
Phil didn't say it, but I'm the token journalist in this group, and very glad to be here nonetheless. I wanted to talk just a minute about how I got here, and it says it will lead to the study group that I want to lead. And what I want to do is go back. I've been going to classes, so I've been thinking about the campus that I was in, and it was the 60s. I was the editor of the student paper. It was 1968. We had two people come to campus that year, Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy. It was a time, as you know from studying history, I guess, that civil rights movement was very big and important. Vietnam was in full swing. It was a time when there was, on the one hand, a great deal of idealism and a great feeling of what we could do with the country, and a feeling that the country wasn't working very well, that there were enormous problems. I can remember Robert Kennedy. As I was editor of the paper, I got to follow him around and spend some time, and he went and talked to a group of campaign workers, and I can still remember him standing up on a chair and standing there talking about the country and jabbing the air and saying, you know, we can do better. We can do better. This country deserves better. And it was a very important period. They were both killed later that same year. It was a feeling of great disgust I had and others. That's when I left the country and went into the Peace Corps and spent 2 years away. I came back and again went into journalism and felt like journalism, like politics, is a very honorable profession. I felt like during Vietnam, the journalists were the good guys. They wore white hats. They did a decent job in reporting some of that war. Later, when Watergate happened, again, I felt the journalists were the good guys, and I was glad to be part of that profession. I do believe in public service, which journalism should have as its main goal, the #1 mission. I've been very glad at public radio to have helped build that organization and cover the news and being willing to take news seriously, not be afraid to be called boring, but to cover things that are important in this society. I was a foreign affairs correspondent for a number of years and worked in Central America and sought, quite frankly, not to let that become another Vietnam. That I did for 19 years, the last 7 as the news director of NPR. Comes up to the 1990s, and once again, I've just left Washington, which I feel it's sad. It's a sort of a sick and corrupted city in many ways. Some of the problems that the governor just spoke about, I don't feel are being addressed. And I'll let the politicians speak for themselves, but the journalists themselves, I feel, again, it's a time where we can do better. It's a time for reform. You have, on the one hand, journalists who are more interested in themselves, I think, in Washington, in their fame and their celebrity and their incomes, more than they are sometimes the news and serious issues. There's a kind of dumbing down of news that we all sense, and a ginning up of entertainment that we also sense. These are very serious things in the profession that I'm in. I feel like for the sake of our democracy, we do need a press that is tackling these issues and doing them in an important way so we as citizens can be informed, extremely well informed, and I feel like we're not as well informed as we should be. That's what my study group is about. And I'm bringing in a number of people who can talk about these issues and who feel these issues and who want to make it better. I'll give you some names because there's some very good people. Daniel Shore, who works at NPR, is coming. David Broder at the Washington Post is coming. A man named Lawrence Grossman, who's the former head of NBC and PBS, is coming. Tom Rosenstiel, who's the head of the Project for Excellence in Journalism and a very big reformer, is one of the people that's coming. 2 other people from the Post, Geneva Overholzer, who's the ombudsman there, former editor of the Des Moines Register, is coming, and Paul Taylor, who runs the project to try to get free airtime for candidates, which makes perfect sense and maybe would help deal with campaign finance issues, but we have a conglomerate press that doesn't agree with that. And this is, I think, the conglomeration and tabloidization that's going on has made matters worse. My bottom line is that the press, journalism itself, is a moral enterprise, not just a business enterprise to make a buck. And I think we're seeing some of the consequences of that, and we're going to talk about it in that study group, and that's on Tuesday, and I hope many of you can come. Bill.
Thank you, Bill. This next gentleman I have a particular pleasure in introducing because it's somebody that I have known and worked with for a number of years when I was in the House of Representatives, and in my judgment always distinguished himself in his effort to be a good legislator and a good representative of his people from Pennsylvania, and that's Bill Clinger, a Republican from Pennsylvania. I was a Democrat from Indiana, and indeed I just use this as an example to point out there is civility in American politics, despite what might get covered by the media or what some politicians like to accentuate. And he had the, perhaps from his point of view, the unfortunate situation of serving a major portion of his congressional career as a member of the minority party of the House of Representatives. And yet in that capacity, he had a reputation for being able to be effective as a minority representative and not simply out in the cold. He then, when the party structure changed in the House of Representatives, he became a full committee chairman of the House Government Reform and Oversight Committee. I have to look at it. They changed all the names of the committee. I can't remember them. And he was vice chairman of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. And he had a reputation for hard work, for taking the legislative job seriously, and for, frankly, not grandstanding in the process. But I also want to mention that with him is his wife, Judy. And Judy, I don't know where she is in the audience here, but she will be here throughout the semester. And I would urge you to seize upon her, and indeed some of our other spouses will be around, because they are people in their own right, have done considerable things. And I dare say Judy, I happen to know this to be the case, can give you some perceptive insight into how Washington works and what it's like to be in American politics today. Bill Clinger.
Thank you very much, Phil. When we vote in the House of Representatives, there are 2 loud bells that ring all over Capitol Hill to tell you that you have 15 minutes to get from wherever you are to the House floor to cast your vote. And then when there are 10 minutes to go, the 2 loud bells go again clanging all over the place. And 2 years ago, I was walking down the central hallway in the Capitol. The 2 bells went off, very loud bells. I was passing 2 tourists at the time, and one turned to the other and said, "My God, one of them's escaped." So I am an escaped politician. I used to say a recovering politician, but that really denigrates what I did for 18 years, and it's not something I really believe in. I really believe that the role that we play is a vital one, that the profession of politician is an honorable one. So I really stopped trashing Congress and my colleagues some time ago. But I will tell you that I, like most of my colleagues, ran against Congress to get there. And I think that is one of the things that we all should rue, the fact that we felt the need to speak against the institution in order to get there. I mean, we were going to come into Washington on our white horse and solve all the problems, and all those people that were there were bums and crooks and malefactors. But I really decided that some time ago that was very counterproductive. I mean, I think that we wonder why the American people have such a low regard for politicians and for the Congress. And we can only really look to ourselves who have contributed to that. The thing that really brought it home to me very vividly was I was sitting in the U.S. Air Club in Pittsburgh one time, and I had learned that I should never be paged anywhere as Congressman Clinger, because that would usually precipitate some sort of a confrontation. But an intern in my office had not gotten the word, and so I was paged in the U.S. Air Club as would Congressman Clinger please come to the front desk. I waited for about 3 minutes hoping that I would not be identified as who I was. And then I walked up to the desk, and as I walked by a very distinguished-looking elderly gentleman in a three-piece suit, obviously a businessman, and as I walked by, he just looked up and gave me a middle finger. I mean, that was his comment, I think, on politicians, on the political process, and so forth. So I am a retired, not a recovering politician, because I really do believe that the role that a politician plays is an important one, and I think that I'm delighted to be here at the Institute of Politics at the Kennedy School, because the credo of this institution is to encourage you to play an active role in the political process, to become a part of the process, not to be, as so many people are, cynical and despairing of the political process. It's a very rewarding profession, certainly, not monetarily, unless you're a crook, and we've had a few of those over the years, but not nearly as many as I'm afraid the media has tried to indicate. Those are the people that get the attention.
We go for our token here every time.
Most of the people that Phil and I served with were honorable people doing their darndest to make things better for this country. I must say that as a Republican, I did have some trepidation about coming to the Kennedy School. I mean, I have to tell you, my friend Al Simpson convinced me, reassured me, that it's just not routinely, the Republicans are not subjected to stoning or caning when they come to Cambridge, that they really do receive a good welcome, and I think I found that to be very true. I am told that, and I think it's clear, that we fellows are in a sort of a very friendly kind of a competition here for your attendance at our study groups. And I've got two very tough acts to follow here. So, the question is, why should you come to my study group, which is going to, and it's very simple. It's going to be, we're going to talk about greed and lust and overweening ambition, underweening ambition, bribery, all those good things. But seriously, the fact is, Uncle Sam is watching you a lot. I mean, he wants you to fasten your seatbelts, he wants you to stop polluting, repay your student loans, pay your taxes. But who's watching Uncle Sam? And I guess that's really what we're going to be looking at. What is the oversight process? How does Congress monitor what goes on in the executive branch? Should they be monitoring it? Are they just meddling and making things worse? Or is there a partnership that could exist to really improve the way the government works? And that, I think, is ultimately what all of us who serve in Congress we're all about and we're trying to do. Thanks.
Thank you, Bill. Our next one is Lana Pollock. Lana comes to us from the state of Michigan. This is Lana, the second one down. Lana was a state senator for a number of terms in the State House of the state of Michigan. She also, like myself, has run for office and lost. She tried to run for the U.S. Congress and for the U.S. Senate at a couple times, so she's quite experienced and in gaining character that one gains from experiences that don't always work out. But she was a very successful senator for a number of years in that state, and especially led the way on a number of environmental issues. So when she left the Senate, she has become the president of the Michigan Environmental Council, an advocacy umbrella group in the state. And indeed, she'll probably mention some of those activities in the process. In addition to that, she, particularly this last year, dove into the international arena and the business of institutional building of democracy in some of the countries of the former Soviet Union and other places around the world where democracy is just emerging. So to try to share her experience and her knowledge in hopes that they can build their systems in place. So we're extremely pleased to have with us Lana Pollock.
Thank you, Phil. I was asked earlier today, as I most often am, are you an attorney? What's your background? I said, a dance teacher. No, I've never been an attorney, and I traveled in some ways a rather unorthodox path to my career, but not unusual for a woman of my age. I'm not quite as old as Dick Lamb, but
He's blushing.
When I got out of college, although I had met and been inspired by John Kennedy, I had plans to be a mother, which I was by that time, a wife, a volunteer, a helpmate, and all the other things that women of the 50s aspire to. One day, with two small children, I was at my neighbor's house in the mid-60s, and I was introduced to a third person who immediately said, "Are you a Republican or are you a Democrat?" And no one had ever asked me that. I thought that was a little forward, but being socialized as a woman to always please and always respond, I said, "A Democrat, I think." And she said, "Oh, good. Will your husband be the precinct captain?" Well, I said at that time what I wouldn't have said today, gee, I don't know. I'll go home and ask him. So I did. I went home, I asked him. He said, yes, I did all the work, and I got hooked on politics. I love politics. I believe in politics. It's not pretty. And for every bad story that you read about, I can tell you two that are worse. But I can also tell you that we live in the freest country in the world, I believe, and will assert, and that what we do with that freedom is up to us. And I choose to stay in it and try and fix it. Tomorrow I'm going to fix it. You know. In terms of losing elections, Phil, it's the ones you win that are tough. I remember the first day in the state Senate. There'd been no women in the state Senate for many years of Michigan. And I was with a group of my colleagues, men, and the introductions, they were kind of good-looking guys, like, suits, just like these guys. And I was introduced to along with them, and this is Senator Faxon, and this is Senator Masso, and this is Senator Faust, and this is Lana. And I said, I've just won an election. It's Senator Pollock. And this person said, oh, I have such a hard time calling you Senator. And I said, practice. So the question is, why aren't I doing a study group on women and women in politics, a worthy subject still? I could, but I'm not. I'm working in the environment now because I think that the environment is the fundamental truth that has to be engaged. We have to be truthful. We can't afford not to be truthful. When the church said Copernicus was wrong about the planets going around the sun, planets didn't care. They didn't yield. They kept going around the sun. When people deny truth today, the environment won't yield to that. So we need to confront these things. I hope we get a lot of different opinions in the study group that I'm leading on Tuesday, and that you'll join us and some very interesting guests. And I thank you very much for today.
On my left is our fifth fellow here. And we're going in alphabetical order except for Dick Lamb, who had to just now slip out to catch his plane. And this is Thaddeus Garrett Jr. And he's had a rich experience in both politics and governmental positions, as well as he's originally an ordained minister of the Methodist Church. But he was a special advisor to President George Bush. He also had worked with the president when he was vice president. Indeed, Thad was at that point his domestic advisor, or at least advisor on domestic policy. He has also been the vice president of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. He was the youngest federal commissioner in the country when he was appointed to be on the Consumer Product Safety Commission as a commissioner. And he's also currently the chairman of the Board of Trustees of Howard University. Thaddeus Garrett.
Thank you very much, Phil. I've enjoyed these many war stories and listening to how people got involved in politics. I tend to believe that it was all in my DNA because I can remember passing out handbills for the local city council candidate in Akron when I was about 8 years old. And it is just something that grew with me, or I grew with it, not to the exclusion of other areas of life. Not originally an ordained minister, still an ordained minister. We're very sensitive about that. But I've always loved politics. I've always loved government. And it has always been an all-consuming motivation for me. And if you are black in this country, let alone being a black Republican in this country, then you wake up every day to a challenge. To many challenges, but in the political system, you really do have to claw your way to the quote-unquote top. I've worked in 3 White Houses in this country over a period of time. Rockefeller when he was vice president, and then George Bush when he was vice president, Ronald Reagan, and George Bush when he was president. And every time I have returned to a White House position, I don't find anybody much else there from my color line or background. This is a tragedy. And I hear Lana talk about the woman discrimination, and that's also a tragedy. The difference is this. Somebody said to Al C. Hastings, a congressman, black congressman from Florida, the other day they said, well, what do you want? What do your people want? So Al C. turned to the man, who was white, of course, and said, I tell you what, you make a list of all the things you want for yourself, your family, your future, and so forth, then sign my name to it. And this is what we face every day. And a great deal of it stems from the rottenness of our political system. Exclusion, and then the design of certain districts and ways that we can have more seats, for example, in a Congress, in a state legislature. But this is not the way you would have had it. This is not the way you would want it. And it's surely not the way we want it. A few crumbs from the table. I don't care if you're a black Republican or a black Democrat. While I am here, I should like to provide a perspective on what some of us have to do and have had to live this life as Americans, particularly in politics. So my topic is the politics of race. And not to the exclusion of black Americans, but all ethnic groups, so that we can look at how ethnic politics developed, how a black congressman campaigns in his district as opposed to an Irish one up here in the Commonwealth. You will find a great deal of similarities, but you will find a great deal of differences based on necessity. Power bases in our various racial and ethnic communities. I guess I have a little bit of an advantage coming from the strongest power base in the black community, the church. But we need to know this, and then more particularly and very importantly, because everyone throws around, we're knocking on the door of a new century. We're, what does our president say? Building a bridge to the new century. Well, you better watch out to see what's in the foundation of that bridge, or one day in this new century, it will collapse. And as long as our politics allow us to ignore a certain segment or many segments of minorities in this country, those minorities are not the only ones who are going to be hurt. Oh, they have denied a good education and jobs and so forth. But those in the majority community who run everything are not going to have a base, a pool of workers 10 years from now, 15 years from now that will be reliable, will not have the luxury of getting on the highways at night, leaving the downtown offices and putting all of that behind them. No, 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 no. And surely, the tax base of this country, for example, will have to be dealt with because you've got so many of us who can't afford to pay any tax. So we're going to mix all of that in to the politics of race. And I would like for you to consider not just attending our study group if you're not a minority. Actually, like I tell people, Roots by Alex Haley, that really was for the majority, to understand the country which the majority controls. And so we're going to go into all of that. We're going to discuss that. We're going to discuss America's future from a very realistic point of view and the absence in the hearts and minds of many people about any kind of future. You need to know that. If you're going to be involved in politics after you leave this place, if you're going to be involved in any human endeavor, corporate endeavor or whatever, you need to know about that foundation that's supposed to hold up this bridge and thus your transit to a new century. So come and join us in the politics of race. We're going to be very free-flowing. And I'm not going to do, I promise you, much preaching.
And finally, last but not least, we do have somebody. Lana may not be a lawyer, but Ricky is a lawyer. Ricky Seidman, she most recently comes to us from being the executive director of Rock the Vote. She's had a variety of experiences in both organizing politics at the grassroots, which Rock the Vote represents, but also in campaign politics and the U.S. federal government. She had several different positions. Was in President Clinton's White House. She was Deputy Communications Director. She was a Director of Scheduling and Advance. She had worked on the transition team as they took over the White House. She had worked on Clinton-Gore campaign in 1992. Indeed, she was the Deputy Communications Director, or the Communications Director within the War Room, which is one of those special things in American history that will be focused on probably forever, of that war room of that campaign. She also has worked in the U.S. Senate, where she was an investigator for the Senate Labor and Human Resources Committee, and she had been a legal director for the People of the American Way. Ricky Seidman.
Thanks, Bill. As you can see, they asked me to be a fellow because I've had so many jobs. Yeah, I don't want to make this a pitch for my study group. It's going to be about presidential politics, and I hope you'll come, but after listening to everyone else, I want to be in their groups, so it's no, it'll be good, but I think I'm especially a little nervous. In politics, there's one of the cardinal rules is never follow the preacher. I want to talk a little bit about what it is that, sort of how I got here. How many of you, could you just raise your hands if you've ever done community service or were required to do it as part of your school or a class or anything like that? It's a lot of people. Well, that's really what got me and sort of set on my path. I grew up in Atlanta, and I graduated from high school in 1972, which was the year that the Atlanta schools were desegregated, and 71. And I went to Georgia State University as a senior in high school on this special program, and had a teacher in sociology who believed that you couldn't understand anything about sociology, the study of people, unless you got out and were around them. And so she gave the class a number of choices of what they could do. You could go to an emergency room and spend 24 full, straight hours there. You could go and observe. She had grown up in carnivals, and you could go and observe at a sideshow at the county fair to see all the corruption in the carny. Or you could volunteer for the Voter Education Project, which was a project based in Atlanta, but that was throughout the South, supporting voting rights for African Americans. So I went to the Voter Education Project, and every Saturday for 3 months, I went door to door. This was in 1972. To ask people if they were registered to vote, and if not, to help get them to a voter registration place, or to help them sign up for an absentee ballot application. And this was, 1972 was really 6 years after the Voting Rights Act took effect. And most of the people I was talking to had never, in their adult lives, although they might be 50 or 60 years old, had never been able to exercise their right to vote until the Voting Rights Act was passed. And voting meant a lot to them, a lot more than it did to me at the time, who'd grown up, my whole life having been able to vote, never thinking about how difficult it could be, never really understanding why it mattered. I mean, yeah, I would have voted when I turned 18, but it was an experience that helped me understand something about the democracy I would have never learned otherwise. So after doing that, I went on in college. I ultimately did become a lawyer, although not to practice law. I just thought lawyers ran the world and figured that would be useful to know how they did it. And then really have had the great fortune in my adult life to, except for about 18 months when I worked at a private investigative firm, to work on causes and issues and for people who I believed in, who could make a difference. And one of the reasons why I'm so happy to be here is because when I was in college, there wasn't anybody to talk about what you could do or what they had done. And I had no role models and no experience. And it found my way into politics through a relatively circuitous route. But now I'm in a position where, I feel like I have a lot to share. So I hope that you'll come to the study group. If you don't make it to the study group, I hope that you'll come by and see me. It is true that I have worked, I think, just about at every different point of advocacy within government, except in the lobbyist paid-for sector.
The non-paid.
I've been the subject of ruthless newspaper articles. I've been investigated by Congressman Klinger's committee. Not by him personally. And so whatever you might be thinking about in terms of how you're going to use this education that you're getting, You know, if there's any way I can help you figure it out, I'd like to do that. Thanks.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is our fellows team for the fall, and we have some additional study groups, as you heard earlier, and we hope you'll watch for them. They'll be posted. We run them regularly. There's a brochure here about them, and they'll be posted weekly, as also any of the guest speakers that are there. And so I would just entreat you to take advantage of these people as a resource in their study groups and throughout the semester. And we're delighted to be able to assemble a team that we think bring a variety of perspectives and experiences, and hopefully you will maximize them as a resource, and hopefully you will educate them in the process as well, so we can send them back into public life after this is done. We thank you very much for being a part of our IOP activity tonight, and we'll hope you'll join us for lots of other of our activities throughout the semester. Thank you.